Hey, afternoon, everyone. So we are live with Mike Hefflinger. Am I pronouncing that right, or Hoefflinger?
Hofflinger, yeah, no, it's one of those old German names. Ignore the E.
Hefflinger. Okay. And I'm glad that we were able to get the audio issue resolved fairly quickly. So, Mike, I'm going to ask you to bear with me through this broadcast. This is the first time we're trying Crowdcast. We've been long-term users of GoToWebinar. But have been wanting to do something more interactive, be able to have actually, this is my first time on screen, frankly. Usually I'm just behind the mic and a voice. And but I was experiencing Crowdcast on some other events for the last few weeks, and I was really impressed with how they could invite speakers and even attendees on with video and stuff, and you could do up to like four in a window. And on top of that, I am trying I set it up to stream live over Facebook and Periscope and YouTube Live. So I'm not going to worry about how much that might be a problem or not. Oh, sorry. And but I just want to finish two shares here from YouTube Live. Oh, and I can see it's coming through YouTube Live pretty well, so that's working. And I just wanted to share it on LinkedIn really briefly. Okay. So, Mike, my apologies for that little bit of delay trying to do.
No worries.
All things.
I love using as much technology as possible.
All a 11-inch MacBook as well. So
excellent. +5 on degree of difficulty.
So listen, Mike, and also to the audience that's joining us, you can put in questions in the chat box, or there's also a question and answer area at the bottom where you can upvote people's questions, but we'll take those a little bit later. Mike, if you take a few minutes and just share your background and the time you were at Facebook, and maybe even a little bit of what you're doing now.
Sorry. Yeah, well, thanks first of all. Absolutely. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. The short biography on me is 25 years in Silicon Valley. Started as a microprocessor designer at Intel in the days when we had just begun to give microprocessors names and we're marketing them to people directly, which doesn't sound like much of a revolution now, but was certainly a big change. Wound up my career at Intel running the Intel Inside program, so very, very large marketing program. And as a part of that, had begun to partner with lots of digital media companies, including, of course, Google, but also Facebook. A very young Facebook in 2007 or so. And that was a time where we were in big transition. We were moving to mobile, and Facebook just looked like an incredibly interesting place to be for kind of a marketing guy like me. And so I moved over to Facebook, where I ran all the marketing for the advertising business. So essentially, what is this advertising product that Facebook was building? How can we help advertisers, marketers around the world of any size, whether you're as big as a Procter & Gamble or as small as a dentist in Idaho, use that product? And so was at Facebook from 2009 through 2015, which is the core of that coming of age period that I describe in the book, when we went from, back in 2009, MySpace, it's hard to remember now, still being the leader in the US in social media, to now Facebook having vanquished all of those people, having grown their user base by 10x, their revenue by 100x, having won mobile, having IPO'd, having gotten its stock price cut in half, coming back by almost 10x, disrupting itself 3 times with big acquisitions, including Instagram, WhatsApp. And after that period, now in the last couple of years, I'm a venture capitalist and finally had a little bit of time to do things that I hadn't before in my career, including writing down what happened at Facebook in that period of time, because we really don't have a record of that. And it's probably, I'm a little biased, but the best untold story in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, I've been reading it the last week, really enjoying it. For me, it's been a little bit of a trip down memory lane, and coming across companies I haven't thought about for about 5 or 6 years. It's kind of it's weird how a company Facebook size and impact, and yet so little really written about it. Just Was there something particular that made you leave in 2015, or that was just kind of the time for you and you wanted to do other things?
Well, I mean, Facebook's an amazing company, and having been there, in those almost 7 years, and having been, a customer before that, it was a phenomenal period that completely defined the company. We grew the business, like I said, by 100x over that time, and it was a super formative period, and I'll always remember it, I think, probably as the culmination of my time in Silicon Valley, to have had a chance to be a part of the Intel story in the decade that was so crucial for them, and then to be able to follow that by being a part of Facebook for that decade. To a technology geek like me, is complete bucket list material. And at the end of that time, because these things are very intense when you're building a company at that moment in time, if you're not giving 120% of yourself, then you're simply not helping leaders like a Zuckerberg or a Grove truly drive the full success that their vision can be. It was a moment for me to take a minute after 25 years and see if there were some other things maybe in the third act of my career, if you will, that I wanted to try. And I'd always thought about writing, and eventually my kids were kind of looking at me and said, you either have to go do this or you got to stop talking about it. So I went and did it.
When did you start working on the book?
Well, it's probably 18 months ago. When you go through the entire process of writing a proposal, helping, agents and publishers understand, both who I am, but also what this story could be. And then, of course, writing it and then getting ready to get the word out. It's I'm a first-time author, so it's like running a small business. You're making the pizza and doing the social media.
Yeah, no, congratulations on the book. And I think a great first one at that.
Thank you.
Where was I going to go next? Well, let's go into. I've got a couple different areas I wanted to touch on in the book. I think one of the. I know what I wanted to mention about the book. I think what's interesting. We always talk about how fast technology moves and so forth, and I think that's sometimes a little overstated. I mean, it does take a number of years for new technologies to become entrenched. But as I was reading the book, and some of the things that had impacted Facebook over a very short period of time, if you haven't touched the book from an editorial perspective for like 6 months as it went through editing and printing and so forth, there could be a major disruption that it's just kind of, you have to account for at some point. It'll need maybe a yearly new edition. So talking, I thought what was really interesting part of the chapter, I think can be very helpful for a lot of people, founders and startups, was the growth engine. And can you talk a little bit more about the discovery leading up to, and then the implementation of the magic moment?
Yeah, what you mentioned is sometimes we look at Facebook's got 1.8, 1.9 billion users, and we think it just poof, right? It just happened, kind of. And any product or service, no matter how well conceived it is or no matter how well timed it is, needs to grow intentionally with its user base. The understanding of, how have we built it, what's working, can we do more of what is working? And you mentioned the magic moment, which is one of the 3 ways that Facebook thinks in an incredibly organized and intentional way about growth. And in the book, I make the point that we can all learn from this, right? Whether, we're a flower shop in Chicago or the next mobile app, that learning from this notion that there is a single number, what they call the North Star metric, that is most important to the business and that everyone should be aiming at, is where everything starts. So for Facebook, the North Star metric was user engagement, right? In the super old days like Yahoo, we would, count page views, but that wasn't really it anymore, right? It was really monthly active users, and then very quickly Facebook realized it was daily active users. It was the percentage of monthly active users that were daily active users. That became the North Star metric. And all teams, whether you were building a product, you were in the growth engine marketing, knew that that is the number that they were watching, because they wanted Facebook to be something that was incredibly engaging, and that was going to mean longevity in the relationship between them and the customer. And so the magic moment that you mentioned is the thing in your product that is more than anything else responsible for getting someone onboarded and getting them to do well at this North Star metric. And so it is for Facebook that moment where you've connected to enough friends, enough things that matter to you, where you begin to see those things in your newsfeed, and it gives you that feeling of connection. The single biggest word that people use to describe Facebook, when they're polled about it, is that they feel connected. That is, to other real people, right? I'm being my authentic self. The people around me are being their authentic self. Now, the point is that that's not the magic moment for every product, right? The magic moment for Uber might be the first time you push the button to get a car, and 5 minutes later, ta-da, there it is, right? And the convenience of that. For Airbnb, it might be that first time that you stay at a wonderful place in a city, it doesn't feel like a hotel, right? So every product has a little bit of a different magic moment that drives your North Star metric, right? And it all feels like, it's very soft and beautiful and easy, but every company really needs to make a decision and be very clear on what the North Star metric is and what the magic moment is in the product experience that drives them.
Right. Well, and I think maybe, in Facebook's case, it's a feel-good moment you're trying to attain. But depending on the company, it's a pain point you're trying to solve. What's that perfect pain point that you're solving now that somebody's going to open up their wallet and pay $20 a month for some service?
No, that's exactly right. Did you, and for example, another lesson in the book, of course, is there something that you're making easier for people? Is there something that you've simplified, right? We keep talking about how wonderful it is that, in the age of the internet now, in the age of mobile now, we can be connected to everything all the time, everywhere that matters to us, and in a way that is almost a burden. Right, and what Facebook's newsfeed tries to do is to filter, to amplify all the things in your life that are coming at you, to those things that you might enjoy the most, those things that are the most relevant to you, right? And it feels in the case of Facebook like it's just an enjoyable process of hearing and feeling connected to friends. But it is really a process of simplification, a process of making the world around you a little bit easier to digest, right? And so your point about dealing with a pain point, that's true even in Facebook's case. We may not think of it that way, but it absolutely is. And I think all of us, no matter whether we're building a service or a product, or big or small, local or global, right? We're in a period now where we can ask ourselves, is there something that we are making simpler for our customers? Because that is super, super valuable.
Right. One of the other things that struck me through the book, and still even right now, it's so hard to wrap your head around, and it's something that is really lost and nobody ever talks about because the service is so seamless. But is the enormity of the processing power that is going on the back end to make the number of calculations and the sheer scale of people that are being served every single second. When you look at the numbers, it's just staggering.
Well, and that's one of the hardest things. Something becomes so ever present in our lives, like Facebook, and of course these days Facebook doesn't just mean Facebook; it means Instagram, it means WhatsApp, it means Messenger. So it means lots of different things to different people all around the world. You begin to lose track of just how big it is. And it may not feel like the obvious thing to write about, but as you mentioned, I spend a chapter in the book talking about the infrastructure of Facebook. That doesn't sound very sexy when you say it like that, right? But we keep saying to each other, "Oh, the cloud, the cloud, the cloud. It's amazing." And but we never think about what is the cloud, right? What is it physically? Who are the people that are building the cloud, right? Because nobody knows them, right? We don't know where this cloud is. So interestingly enough, of course, Zuckerberg and Facebook announced their 9th Facebook-owned data center yesterday, in addition to the 8 that they've built around the United States as well as in Europe. And this all sounds factual. I'm sorry.
Where's the 9th one going to be?
So the ninth one is I think going to be in Nebraska, right? And they have other ones in the high desert of Oregon, and they've got ones that are north of the Arctic Circle in Sweden, and they show pictures of it. They look like these weird warehouses with no windows that you could fit 7 football fields into, and and there's a bunch of servers there, and they do stuff, and to us it's all super abstract, but it manifests itself in our ability to fire up our phone standing in line at Starbucks and, in a matter of a couple of seconds, have delivered to us this completely customized newspaper of our lives, and that's how it shows. But we don't think about all the things that have to happen behind the scenes to do that for 1.2 billion people a day. And that's just Facebook, not even the hundreds of millions that use Instagram, the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions that use WhatsApp or Messenger. They have allowed us to simply take this for granted, and that's the genius of these modern infrastructure builders.
Well, I think I've always had a fairly strong appreciation for the software side of Facebook and what was going on, but I gotta say, I think your book did a great job of bringing some awareness on the hardware side, and those hardware engineers that build this thing that is humming, and to keep something running 24/7 and with that many people, it's incredible. It really is.
Well, it happens at a scale, like I said, that's a little bit hard for us to fathom. But I think for all of us, whether we are a part of a smaller company, whether we're building our own company, we're building a new product or service at a big company, I think thinking about how it can be fast and simple is really powerful. And I know it doesn't seem like a world-altering kind of aspect of a product, but it's so important now. And the people that do this, right, whether you're writing code, which is important, or even building hardware, we don't know them as well, but they're very, very important, and we have to think of them as super integral to the customer experience. And again, we're talking about a company that's so huge, it's almost kind of hard to understand. But the point of the book is that there's things we can learn here, even if we're much, much smaller.
Well, and even just one more point on that. I mean, even the size that Facebook grew, and having to keep up with that during the, I guess 2010, 11, 12 period was exponential. And you think about doubling a data center or tripling it in less than 12 months. I mean, it really is amazing feat. Let me we were talking about the global aspects of Facebook and how that has been extremely important to its growth. The other thing that I learned that I thought was interesting was the localization approach that Facebook took to translating and bringing other communities into the Facebook world. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, in 2007, 2008, Facebook was not yet translated into any other languages, and they were just beginning to get big enough where being available in local languages in more places was going to be a factor in their growth, right? And we talked a minute ago about the North Star metric. Are we growing? Are more people engaging? Are we having these magic moments? And it came to the point where they recognized that being available in local language would be an important factor in allowing that magic moment to happen in more places around the world so that they could grow. And so they began to think about how to translate the service. And at that time, the way you would do it is you would pay, millions of dollars to translation agencies, and you would have local teams. And it's, actually at the time, that's what MySpace was doing. And this was expensive and relatively slow. And at the time, Facebook wasn't making $27 billion a year. And so this was, and it didn't have 20, 30,000 people working for it. So this was much more difficult to do. And so they decided to try to figure out a way if they could get the community involved, and divided Facebook into the 300,000 words that made up the service, put those words up for the community to translate into their local language, and allowed the community to propose words that would be the translations for everything that occurred in the Facebook interface, and then also for the community to vote on whether those were the right local words to use, right? So, you wouldn't just do a dictionary translation, you would actually make sure that the local community felt like they had the right word for what like means in Spain, right? So, and unbelievably enough, we're able to accomplish the translations for these countries like France, for example, in less than 24 hours. It was unheard of. And not only was an effective way to do it, but also very fast, and led to this massive growth of use by people that were simply connecting within the country, right? Oftentimes, Facebook would begin to grow in a country because another country where Facebook was already big was starting to make connections to that country. But by having local language, you made it much easier for that next wave of local users to begin to participate. And it was really, really important to Facebook's growth at that time. And certainly since then, we're now well over 100 languages that have been translated. The power of this, of course, is clear, because even smaller countries where, if you were doing this a different way, you wouldn't be able to invest, are able to benefit now from local language versions of Facebook.
Well, that's an aspect that I never had an appreciation for, in terms of being here in the U.S. And using the Facebook app. I have no impression what Facebook Lite looks like, or what the interface is, and just also, even I can't even necessarily picture how that crowdsourcing and voting on different words occurred and what the interface was. But just an area that was completely blank to me before this.
Yeah, and it's it is another example of these stories that are worth writing down because they were important in how it actually happened. But it's also that we can learn from the kinds of things you have to do to make something more successful. You also mentioned really quickly Facebook Lite, which is a version of Facebook that you can use in much, much lower bandwidth environments. You and I, we have the great benefit of, calling each other on LTE and, watching HBO over our phone. And that's a very US American thing, right? And Facebook Lite, instead of being 100 megabyte download, is a 2 megabyte download, right? And is the kind of service that you can use over a 2G network, which, would be much, much, much more common, in places like Africa, India, Southeast Asia, right, where they don't have the privilege of the kind of connections that we have, or the ability to, to take, all this discretionary income that we have and throw it at expensive data plans, right? That is much less common. And as Zuckerberg tries to connect the world, is really crucial.
So while we're still on the topic of kind of Facebook outside the U.S., with the exception of China, why do you think it's been so difficult for Facebook to dominate in Russia, Japan, and South Korea? Because it would almost be too simplistic to say, well, it was a language issue, because you guys are doing it in 100 different languages as well.
No, and that's an important question. I mean, it is the #1 social network in over 100 countries, but there's some important ones, as you mentioned, where it isn't. And the stories are they're a little bit different. You mentioned China, and of course, that is a local regulation and kind of political circumstance. The service is simply not allowed behind, what's called the Great Firewall in China. In South Korea, there is a local service called KakaoTalk that was simply able to be more popular faster than Facebook. In Japan, it's a little bit of horse race now between Line, which was a big local social network and was constructed in a way that was a little bit of a better fit for the Japanese culture and how sharing happens in that culture. And in Russia, there was a very, very early, practically identical copy of Facebook called VKontakte. It was literally, if you look at the service, it was simply a lift of the Facebook design and the Facebook functionality, which is not uncommon in Russia, where kind of copy protection, things like that is much looser than what we're used to. And they were simply able to rise to prominence before Facebook, kind of the original product, was able to compete with them. Interestingly enough, Instagram is bigger than Facebook in Russia, and so it shows you a little bit that if you can offer a different service that's not an identical copy, you can become successful. So those are some standout countries that are quite big, where Facebook is not number one, and it's interesting to dissect why that is, because the reasons are a little bit different.
Are those markets that Facebook is still trying to figure out what the magic moment is?
Well, yeah, great question. Way to tie that back there. And I think the super short answer is yes, for two reasons. One, Mark absolutely is on a mission to make the world more open and connected. And that absolutely means, over time China, over time Japan, over time Russia. But also because there are certainly a couple of markets in there that if he was able to be successful in that connection and to launch a business, it would be financially valuable. Japan is in the top 3 advertising markets in the world. Right. China, of course, at 1.2 billion has an enormous, and a rising very rising economy, has a number of consumers. All of that would be very attractive to Facebook. Its ability to connect businesses to people should play out just as powerfully there as it does anywhere else. So those are the reasons that he would care. Your question about the magic moment is, I think, a really good one, which is I think there are a couple of companies in those places, and we'll put China to the side for a second because it's simply a policy, regulation, political circumstance there. But in the other countries like Japan, South Korea, Russia, somebody was able to get to that magic moment before Facebook does. And so now, I think it will be a little bit of a complex comeback, but their ability to focus on systematic growth is very strong. And we've seen them, be much more successful in Japan with Facebook itself. We've seen them, use the diversity of their business now to use Instagram as a way to push forward in Russia. So they've got a number of ways to continue to deal with this. And I think it is important to them. I think in Mark's 10, 20, 50-year vision, he doesn't want to leave any country behind for any reason.
I'm gonna go off on a tangent for a second, because I want to talk about China actually, since we were kind of the Great Firewall, and it's not often I get to talk to somebody who's worked at one of the big dominating internet companies of our time. I'm just kind of curious on your opinion. Maybe this was discussed during your time there. As Americans in the U.S. and supporting open democratic societies, do we have a certain role and stance to take in terms of working with China? Because it always seems like, especially whether Google was kind of in and out and fighting there, and and it's a sizable market. There's a lot of money there, but at what cost are we trying to do business there, in terms of wanting them to open up more and have more freedom of choice? It's a very sticky discussion.
Yeah, it's super interesting, and the advent, of course, of the internet, and the ability to cross physical and national boundaries with a completely different kind of community and network, has kind of brought these questions to the forefront. It is, you're right, it's an intersection of business and I don't know if it's a moral question, but it's very complicated. I think in Zuckerberg's mind, Zuckerberg is a pragmatist. He's very rational. I think he has an enormous amount of vision, but I think he's very rational about how to pursue it. If he were with us on the call, I think he would talk about the fact that he is a business and he has to operate in different countries under the rules of those countries. And it's not his to suggest that, his particular approach to business, his approach to regulation, his approach to complex moral questions in the U.S. is better than the approach that is mandated by both local culture and local regulation. And so he's been very clear that Facebook will, as a company with all of its products, will operate under local regulation. And so that means in Germany, he has to suppress Nazi hate speech because it is prohibited by law. He has to, in Islamic countries, make sure that there's no depictions of the Prophet because that is culture and local law. In China, he is not allowed to operate currently because it is prevented by politics and regulation. And I think he has made it very clear that Facebook respects local regulations and will follow those local regulations. And so, in a way, you could argue that position allows him to kind of sidestep the question of should a service like Facebook exist in a country that is communist and, depending on how you view the situation, suppresses certain degrees of human communication. Because he simply says that we respect local regulations, and that is why Facebook does not exist in China. But he could invent something that is a cross between Facebook and Instagram, focused on public content. And what I mean by that is not so much what you and I say to each other, but what an entertainer or a sports personality says on Facebook and Instagram, where Zuckerberg has by far the deepest bench of content being produced, and he could blend that and turn it into a new service and launch it in China and be completely compliant with regulations while still offering a service that's interesting, that would allow him to have some success in that country. It might not look like the Facebook that we're used to, but it would be a pragmatic approach, and it's the one that I imagine in the book a little bit, trying to think about how to play this long game.
Right. So one thing that struck me when I started reading the book is, and I wasn't quite sure what to expect, but you really don't share anything about yourself in the book. Your personal experience at Facebook during that period. So I'm going to try and put you, on the seat for that right now. But just share two things. What do you feel was your greatest achievement, contribution at Facebook from a personal standpoint? And what was one of the more difficult periods, either for you personally or from a career standpoint while being there?
Yeah, my immediate reaction is it was kind of one and the same, and it takes me back to 2012, which was a very busy year for Facebook, but probably most importantly, its IPO, which was heavily anticipated. It was $100 billion. It was going to leave Facebook with $100 billion valuation, but did not go well for a bunch of reasons. That I go into the book. Including the Nasdaq's inability to close transactions for 3 or 4 hours the day of the IPO, and uncertainty is not good when there's a lot of money in play. So, but that was the least of it. It had, they had large advertisers like GM, suggesting that Facebook was not a great marketing tool, literally the week of the IPO. So as a marketer, right, the teams that I was building around the world were responsible for telling the story of how advertising on Facebook works and why it's so effective. Both for very large advertisers, precisely like GM, or again, much smaller advertisers, like a dentist in Idaho. So, it was a difficult period. So then 103 days of a declining stock price, concerns about the revenue growth rate of Facebook, their ability to adjust to the mobile wave and continue to have a successful advertising business as consumers were shifting, and it just an absolute tsunami to mobile. It was a difficult and very busy period because the most important decision that Facebook ever made internally also happened at this time, which was to allow advertising in the Facebook newsfeed. What we had seen prior to that was ads to the right side of the experience on web, but obviously in mobile, famously, as as Greg Bodros, one of the former Facebook product guys, said, you know, the right-hand side of mobile is your hand, right? So if you were going to serve advertising, it had to happen in the newsfeed. And that was a borderline kind of religious place, right? Because it was where that magic moment of the consumer experience was taking place. And so building an advertising product that was good enough to put relevant advertising into the middle of that newsfeed was a totally formative moment. And it was a tense period, because looking in from the outside, right, the world was losing its confidence in Facebook. From the inside, we were on the cusp of making this crucial decision. And then, you know, for me and my teams, of course, we had to make sure that we were doing a very good job of telling that story of how powerful that product, that advertising product, was going to be to the world. If we had failed at doing that, right, playing our part in telling that story, we would have wound up on the wrong side of the inflection point, and you know, that would have led to, I think, a continued decline of Facebook, which is hard to imagine now, since, you know, it's been such a consistent period of growth in the 5 years since the IPO. But that was a tense moment for Facebook overall. You know, the ability to just stay focused and get this done rather than to be overwhelmed by what was happening from the outside. And for me and my teams, you know, to do a good job of telling that story. It's, you know, it's hard to remember now that Facebook struggled so much in the early part of 2012. But that was probably the most intense period, but also the one that was most satisfying, because pulling those kinds of business turnarounds is unusual.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost ironic to talk about, you know, the struggling of the $100 billion company, but it was true. Something.
Well, it's one of those "be careful what you wish for" moments, right? You know, now you're worth $100 billion. Congratulations. Here's a bunch of expectations.
Right. Well, and I think Snapchat is facing that right now. Something that struck me during the reading about the advertising that I didn't understand before, actually, and I wonder if there are if Google and Microsoft address it the same way. But I didn't know that that the ad system, the price of the ads got more expensive as the ads performed worse, and so I guess, and it seemed like it was a purposely designed method to weed out not quality advertisers or not quality ads. But is that a normal facet of digital advertising today?
Well, not all of it, but I would not say that Facebook was the first to do it. So the mechanism, of course, that they use is an auction that happens behind the scenes, you know, for every ad that's delivered, where every advertiser that would like to target that particular person is stacked against each other, both in terms of what they're willing to pay for the ad, as well as what their prior performance has been of advertising generally, or advertising to that user in particular. And the system predicts literally billions of times a day how well a particular ad will do. And so it will actually reward advertisers that appear to be particularly relevant. They have better click-through rates. They have lower rates of having their ads identified as misleading or even offensive, which users can, of course, do inside the Facebook system. And so the effective outcome of that is that if a weak advertiser, you know, or someone has a poor value proposition who doesn't seem to be connecting with people, wants to continue to be successful in those auctions, the price they have to pay to communicate with people is going to continue to go up and up and up and up, because that system is able to easily, well, the better way to say it is reward good advertisers. The downside is to punish bad advertisers. And it has the outcome of simply, you know, connecting better advertising with people. And Facebook is not the first to run an auction system like that. Google would certainly be, you know, the one you would identify as kind of popularizing or making big that particular system, which is, you know, if I'm an advertiser and I'd like to talk to people that have typed red crayon into their search box, Google will auction off that advertising interest against each individual who types in those words. Facebook, of course, does it for something that isn't about search, right? It's simply about understanding people and communicating, things to them from businesses. So again, another perfect example of a very complex thing that happens behind the scenes, but plays a big role in making the service something that we like to use.
Right. Um, going back to the infrastructure that Facebook had to build internally, and something else that struck me, very strongly in the book, because I want to make sure I understood it correctly. Is my understanding is that Facebook ended up designing a lot of their own infrastructure hardware and software, of course, to run on that. But hardware that they weren't necessarily. I mean, they were purchasing components like CPU chips and stuff. But is it true? I mean, they ended up building their own switches that they didn't buy up from Cisco.
Yeah, we're getting into some of the esoterics of what it means to build the physical things that make up a cloud. And it isn't just about, we talk a lot maybe about servers, and how fast those have to be so that they can build, your personal newspaper for you, because the system that Facebook has to build to respond to, me firing up my app at Starbucks is more complicated even than, getting you a good search result from Google, because the result that I get, when I fire up my Facebook feed is different than the one that you get, right? Because our friends and the things that we're connected to are different. Whereas, if you search for red crayons on Google, you're going to get a pretty similar answer to what I would get. So, making that fast, it means servers that are fast, code that is fast, but it also means networking equipment that is fast, right? The throughput that they have in and out of their data centers is almost inconceivably large, right? It's thousands and thousands of times more than what we have at home, of course, and they have to do it across the world. So you're absolutely right. They built their own networking equipment. They built their own server equipment. They built it so that it performed only the things that were utterly necessary for Facebook to deliver its services, right? And they would, they have to store so many photos, for example, that they, in their servers and their operating systems, they completely bypass all these layers that would have to happen in a general purpose system. And they simply, when a photo comes in, they simply put it directly here on this place, in the storage system. And all of those things were completely customized just for raw speed. Every 10, 100 milliseconds that it takes extra, for your and my feed to show up and for me and you to see what our friends are up to, is something that hurts the magic moment, right? And so that's why infrastructure is one of those things, nobody will ever talk about it unless it's not going well. I mean, it's one of the hardest jobs in the universe. And, one of the most interesting things is that they've done is, after building all this complex equipment, they have completely open sourced it so that everyone in the industry can benefit and contribute to the way that servers are designed, networking equipment is designed, AI software is written, all of those things, which probably took hundreds of thousands of hours from Facebook employees and probably involve very significant technical breakthroughs, they've open sourced, because it's valuable to them to have an even larger community think about how to make this stuff better.
Well, I mean, as you mentioned, I mean, you hit it on the head with the technical breakthroughs, and that's what I didn't have an appreciation for before. I mean, it's not necessarily just about thinking Facebook as a social networking company or software company, but I would have never thought of them as a hardware design company, with the likes of competing against an Apple or Cisco or an HP and having that capability, where it could be its own spin-off division, frankly, if they wanted to go in that.
And I think, a lot of that is because they do believe in being a part of the technology community and contributing hardware and software to that community. Some of it is also selfish, because it all comes back to the magic moment, right? If you need to build your own hardware, if you need to have your own data center, if you need to write 20% more efficient code, to have a better magic moment, they will do that. And they have to do that. And their ability to be a part of a community where they contribute to the community, but they're also able to get, the technical expertise of more than just their own employees, is crazy like a fox if you think about it, right? There is some selfish motivation involved in sharing all this technology with the community.
Right. Um, let's talk about Google Plus for a couple minutes. So I remember that period very strongly. Late 2011, 2012. Something that struck me that you'd written in the book that I didn't really, it didn't hit me as hard till I read it, was I didn't realize how many social networking companies Google had acquired during that period. And companies like Dodgeball and Aardvark, which I haven't thought about or heard for a number of years.
Yeah.
I remember Aardvark was a great, I think, competitor to Quora at the time.
Yep.
But who knows where it is now? What do you? Google seems to have this track record of acquiring companies and then doing nothing with them, or maybe they've been acquiring for the talent. And then I thought it was very interesting as well that you as you talked about the ability for Google Plus to grow to a certain size and the different adoption rates and amounts of people, and then that chasm that for some just can't be overcome. But I don't know if you just have any much anecdotal experience or personal experience in terms of having dealt with Google, and I know it was you also mentioned well, actually, just going back to Instagram for a second and that acquisition, something that struck me that I didn't realize, it might be a surprise to a lot of people, is Facebook having, because Instagram was using the Facebook-like connection, that Facebook internally had all this knowledge about the growth and status of Instagram that nobody else did. I mean, you talk about inside knowledge.
Well, it's the key to making like phenomenal moves, I think, is your ability to know something that vast majority of other people don't know, right? If you pursue something that everybody thinks is a genius idea, you most likely are going to have a lot of competition. So good idea, congratulations, right? But your ability to succeed is going to be limited by the competition. And what was interesting, we look back on it now, 600 million users of Instagram. Of course, Zuckerberg was a total genius to acquire them when they had 10 million users, 18 employees, and $0 million of revenue, right in the middle of the quiet period prior to their IPO, right? So, but he had two things. One is, Zuckerberg had built a long-term relationship with Kevin Systrom, the CEO of Instagram, that went back years. And sometimes, when we let Aaron Sorkin kind of oversimplify people for us, like he did in the Social Network, the movie, right, where he would like us to believe that Zuckerberg is socially awkward and this was a little bit of an accident, we forget that Zuckerberg is a great relationship builder. For instances like the Instagram acquisition, the same is true for Jan Koum, the CEO of WhatsApp, which I think allowed Zuckerberg to have an inside track there. But the second thing, as you said, that Zuckerberg knew is Instagram was running on top of the Facebook platform in terms of you could log into Instagram using Facebook, and that allowed Facebook to have insight into just how engaging Instagram was. Because when you're a little company like that, Kevin Systrom, Mike Krieger, the two founders of Instagram, you don't have to tell the world how big you are. And then occasionally they would say we have 1 million users and now we have kind of 12 million users. And, but you don't have to tell anybody anything, right? Especially when you're being successful. But Zuckerberg knew exactly what was happening, not only in terms of user base, but also engagement. And talk about someone who's, well-versed at the North Star metric of engagement. They were able to see just how interesting Instagram was to the people that were using it, and also at the same time not have such an ego about Facebook that they didn't realize that people would want to connect with each other using something other than Facebook over time. And so that Instagram acquisition has a number of very interesting stories inside of it, way beyond just the act of acquiring Instagram, right? It's Zuckerberg's knowledge, his ability to bring something in and build it to be successful really allowed him to become much more than Facebook. And imagine Facebook competing now with newcomers like Snapchat, without having Instagram in its quiver, right?
Yeah.
But it's the kind of decision Zuckerberg had to make 5 years ago so that he could be in a great position now, to serve more people and to play better defense.
Well, I mean, I think at the time, at a billion seemed it was a very head scratching number, but now it looks like a steal after 22 billion for WhatsApp. Not even what, a year later.
Yeah, no, as a couple of years later, but no, exactly right. I think, I'd like to believe everyone involved there feels like it worked out very well because, Kevin Systrom, Mike Krieger, the co-founders of Instagram, were able to continue to build exactly what they wanted to build, right, and make it very, very big without having to solve the problems of infrastructure,
right,
or I'll use kind of a gross industry word, monetization, the ability to run an advertising service on top of Instagram. That was something that Facebook, Zuckerberg, the rest of the infrastructure team, the advertising teams could bring to Instagram so that Systrom and Krieger could concentrate on just continuing to build a great product. And so, there will be some people who say, if Systrom had just hung on and IPO'd Instagram, he'd be way richer now. I don't think it's so clear. I think he was able to continue to build a product that he really loved to build and still loves to build, while growing it and having a business related to it that was much, much easier for him as a part of Facebook than to go it alone.
So you're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about some more contemporary stuff going on in the space today. And you spent a chapter on talking about VR and AR and what that might be bringing to everything. What's your take on what's happening at Oculus right now? Just last week, Palmer Luckey moving on. I'm assuming I haven't kept up with that much, but John Carmack is still there, correct?
Yes. Yeah. So, as you mentioned, virtual reality or augmented reality, they feel a little abstract and weird to us now because they're just in such a formative stage of their development. But the reason that they're so important is because they might mark a shift in the way that we consume media. We've seen how disruptive it was for the smartphone to come along and displace the personal computer. And, kind of historians like Mark is with Silicon Valley, right? They know that disruption can come from anywhere. And if you're not paranoid, somebody else will be. And that's usually who wins, right? I mean, because they're all disciples of the Andy Grove book. And so, I think the reason that the top 6 consumer companies in the world are all working on VR, or I think much more importantly, augmented reality, because I think that will just be much more commonplace, including the giants, right? Apple, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, is that they all want to make sure that they are playing a significant role if this winds up being the next evolution of media. And that's why,
you said in the book, it's no longer if, it's now too big to fail.
Which maybe a reference to the banking system was a little unfortunate, but no, I would, so if you made me guess, not that you were, but if you made me guess, I would say we are going to see the dawn of very large-scale consumer augmented reality in 2019. It feels to me like between what Microsoft is doing, what Facebook is doing, what Google is doing, and what Apple is rumored to be doing, that we are going to see something, a very, very big, real slugfest starting to happen in 2019, because I think everybody is asking themselves whether this could be the next evolution. And I don't even know that is necessarily occur at the cost of mobile, right? I think we'll have our phones in our pocket or our purses, and they will be the connection and the computing, and our glasses, right, will simply overlay information onto our real world that's useful for us, and will be a new display mechanism. So, that's the origin. I think Mark is playing both defense and offense. That's the origin of his interest in Oculus, which of course, started its life in Palmer Luckey's garage as a virtual reality system, right, which still needs to be tethered to a personal computer and so forth. And Palmer invented largely that interface. But since the acquisition of Oculus in 2014, there has been, and I think this is what you were intimating a minute ago, there has been quite a bit of change in the leadership of that team. Maybe most visibly the departure of Palmer Luckey from Facebook last week, but even the prior CEO of Oculus has moved into a different role. And then maybe most importantly for the future, the arrival of the former Xiaomi executive, Hugo Berra. Xiaomi is sometimes described as the Chinese Apple. They are a maker most prominently of smartphones, and they're highly respected for that. Not a name that we know as much over here, but of course, if you're big in China, you're big. But relatively famous Google and Xiaomi executive Hugo Berra is coming back from China to be the new leader of Oculus for Zuckerberg at Facebook. And I think all of this together shows that while the Oculus acquisition so far may not have gone exactly the way that Zuckerberg would have wanted to, they are dead serious about being effective in this space and are able to bring these highly respected people like Berra to the company to go build these things for them. So I think it may feel like we're a little bit of a lull technologically here, but it is going to be very, very interesting 2 years from now.
No, I just going from at CES this last year, I was astounded. I mean, the number of VR companies was like 5 times from 12 months before. It's just getting crazy. So with a few minutes left, I want to just pick your brain a little bit more. What do you think about Foursquare today? And I remember when Places launched, and that was a very big worry for people that were happy about Foursquare and the company. But is the whole idea of checking in, is that something that's just not important anymore, or is the localization and hyper-local connectedness just not there yet in terms of technology and infrastructure, or is it just a kind of a dead feature or add-on for social?
Yeah, I think it's a great example because Foursquare was a big deal at that time, and Facebook introduced Places as a way to fend off the rise of Foursquare. I think checking in was an important activity to people. It's pretty clear that it isn't anymore, and I think it's mostly because the value that we get from Places is really more having that information come to us in what I think you would call a little bit more of an ambient way. I'm here. There's some things that we can tell you about here, right? But you don't receive most of the value anymore from actively checking in somewhere. Right. That doesn't mean that information about Places, Google Local, Yelp, some of the kind of ambient suggestions that Facebook has built into the product, that those aren't important. They are. But I think we as people, at least at any kind of significant scale, are not deriving most of the value about that information from actually checking in and putting things into the system. I think we derive most of the value by pulling things from that system. And I think that's why we've seen this notion of checking in kind of, come and go a little bit. Or if it hasn't gone so much, it certainly hasn't grown, to be something that 1 billion people are using.
Right. Well, speaking of 1 billion people, let's talk about Twitter for a second, because they don't have 1 billion people. But and I have to admit that Twitter was my first social network, and I think people always remember their first and is most fond of that. And frankly, that's why I've personally I gravitate towards Twitter first before Facebook, but just kind of an instinctual thing. But it struggles, and I don't know. Sometimes I think they leave a lot of money on the table, and I don't know if it's an execution problem or what. And I'm not, from a personal standpoint, I've been reading some good opinion pieces that maybe networks like Twitter don't have to be as large as Facebook or as large as Google. I mean, it's very good at what it does and for what it provides. And maybe focus on. I mean, my God, who in the right mind would be upset about having 300 million customers? but it's a real problem for them, right?
Yeah. Well, and it's, I mean, kind of pontificating about, how to fix Twitter is a little bit of a hobby in Silicon Valley. I think it's always, so much easier to look in from the outside than it is to actually be Jack Dorsey and actually deal with the problem. So I don't mean to trivialize this, but I think you hit the nail on the head. I think these days, the problem is that Twitter is neither fish nor fowl, right? And fish would be an incredibly large system like Facebook and the other applications that they have, where any advertiser or any person knows that they are going to be able to talk to anyone and everyone in the world, right? I'm oversimplifying a little bit, but if you want to, have the largest possible system and you want to participate in it as a person or as a business and an advertiser, you would go to Facebook. On the other hand, and I think it's completely legitimate business model to be just really, really, really good at a really valuable and interesting niche, right? So for example, Snapchat is really, really good with Gen Z, right? And the younger millennial set, right? They're really not so awesome like with like being everyone. But I think what you're seeing from Evan Spiegel, their CEO, is that they're very happy being very good at a niche, right? And if you can be profoundly interesting to that audience, right, and then have an interesting business and advertising product for them, which is what the vertical full screen videos on Snapchat are, you can be a good business. The problem is Twitter is neither one of these things. It is not the MTV of the Gen Z generation, and it is not the talk to everyone anytime size of Facebook. And I think the problem is that Dorsey is stuck between these two things.
Well, talking about, something just dawned on me when you talked about Snapchat and it meeting the needs of Gen Z very well, and it's filled that niche. Is it potentially possible? I mean, I've tried to use Snapchat, and I just can't get my head around it. I can't see I don't see the interest of it, but that's just me. But I know there's this huge section of the population that is, it is the be all end all. But is it very possible that it might be the be all end all for that particular demographic of people? Because as they get older, okay, yeah, Snapchat's their first thing. It's what they love. Like I love Twitter still, but are the kids in middle school and going into high school now adopting Snapchat like it was being adopted 3-4 years ago by the current Gen Z generation?
Well, I think we go where our friends are, in a way, right? And so I think that's why it's been so popular with Gen Z, which what I would say kind of someone who's 18 years or younger today would fit into Gen Z, right at the boundary with very young millennials. And it's a system that works for them. And you mentioned Snapchat. You fire up Snapchat on the first screen, there's literally no letters on it or no words, right? That's why, the older generation is a little bit, gray like me, right? I mean, why we sometimes struggle with it, or this very high rate of communication, very ephemeral messaging is a little bit new and different for us, but is a way that Gen Z, the younger millennial set, feels very, very, very connected to all the people in their lives. And that's why it's important to them, right? And why we shouldn't make fun of it, right? I think if you can have a passionate audience there, and that's why I liken it a little bit to MTV. I don't know, if that's a phenomenal analogy, right? But that's it's niche, but it's a very desirable audience, and that's how you can build a great business, right? But I don't think you can look at Twitter, and say that it has this dominant role with a particularly niche audience, right? And so, and you got me to suggest that anything that 150 million people use a day is niche is a little crazy, but I would certainly, relative to Facebook, I would call Snapchat more niche. But its approach is clearly to just try to be unbelievably engaging to people in that niche, and to be valuable for advertisers that want to communicate with that niche, right? And what we in the business, I know it's a little kind of inside baseball, but what we call, maximizing ARPU, or the average revenue per user, right? Their intention is to not at all be Facebook, but simply to make an enormous amount of money per highly engaged user that they have.
Yep. Where do you think Yahoo ends up 4 to 5 years from now? is it still is it a content? When I try to think about Yahoo right now, and I'm not even, I can't even couldn't tell you like what major content brands are Yahoo known for right now. All I remember is they hired Katie Couric and gave her a lot of money, and it didn't really go anywhere. But I just I wonder what happens to it.
Well, I think we see Verizon kind of trying to roll up content a little bit to try to see if they could be the third of the internet triumvirate, right? I mean, everything right now is kind of going in the direction of Google on one side of the chessboard, Facebook on the other side of the chessboard, and their respective ecosystems, kind of trying to kind of heading towards each other. They make every incremental dollar that's projected for the next 5 years in digital advertising is projected to go to Google or Facebook. I think Verizon is trying to see if they can roll up some significant part of the rest of all of that and see if they can get the data and users that between themselves as a carrier and AOL, Yahoo, and so forth, to try to see if they can make a third system with a degree of kind of critical mass, just to see if they can be satisfied being the third player there, hoping that advertisers are looking for an alternative to Google and Facebook. I think, in the minds of consumers, I think you hit the nail on the head. If you have a difficult time describing why you would want to be in a place more than any other place, I think you'd have a very hard time saying right now, I go to Yahoo because it does X better than the rest of the world.
So last question, we'll wrap it up. What should we be keeping an eye on from Facebook in 18 to 24 months? What should we maybe see that shouldn't surprise us, or what should we maybe see that will surprise us?
Well, the thing that won't surprise you is that they're going to continue to do well with the thing that is most important to them, which is the user experience, the user engagement, and most especially its news feeds, certainly Facebook and Instagram, and keeping those clean and well lit. We talked about how to get rid of bad advertisers. I mean, they've got 10 years of experience now at keeping the newsfeed clean and well lit. We could go on for an hour about the notion of fake news and how emotional that topic is to us, and how complicated it is. So I don't want to broach that subject, but they're going to have to do well at making us feel like they're taking care of us, like we are not being manipulated, like we continue to have choice. That we actually maybe are exposed to some diversity, of viewpoints, not have opposing viewpoints forced on us. We hate that generally as people, but to have it be diverse. So I think you'll see a lot of work there, way beyond just the initial stuff that they've done to identify disputed content. We're beginning to see that now, but so that is the bread and butter of Facebook as a company, right? It's the bread and butter of their business. The business is the bread and butter of being able to fund new things, right? So that's totally unsurprising, but you're going to see them be very active there over the next couple of years. I think they're going to need to spend some time playing good defense against the up-and-comers. They used to be an up-and-comer, and they beat big players like Google and Microsoft in areas that those two should have owned. They need to make sure that Snapchat doesn't somehow find a way to really hurt them, in the core of their business. And you can see how much defense they're playing now, using assets like Instagram, WhatsApp, Messenger to compete with with Snapchat there. So they're going to have to play a good defense there. And then they're going to have to do a really nice job of bringing us a couple of new things. If augmented reality comes around, and that's an important way that we feel connected to the world, that we understand the world, they're going to need to play a big role there. If messaging, at least in kind of the Western world, starts to play a role way beyond just you and I texting each other, but in a way that we begin maybe to replace mobile apps with messaging systems, they're going to want to be front and center in that development. That's where you'll see Zuckerberg put his effort. He is very passionate about connecting the rest of the world. We talked about, you and I never think about what the situation is like economically and infrastructurally in India, Southeast Asia, Africa, but it's very important to Mark, and he'll continue to operate there. And I think in general, we're in a very fascinating moment where it feels like we're kind of at the top of the S-curve of the last few things, social, mobile, and we're before the beginning of the S-curve of kind of the next thing. Let's call it maybe artificial intelligence, messaging assistants and augmented reality, making it up. But that's kind of where we are, and that's why it feels right now like a lull, which to me is always the most fascinating period in technology as a business. So watch out for 2 years from now.
I think a lull is needed just for everybody to catch up a little bit. Well, Michael, thank you very much for your time today. It's been a great discussion. Really very good book. I highly recommend people go to Amazon, pick up a copy of Becoming Facebook, and look forward to speaking with you again.
Thanks very much for having me on. Really appreciate it. Best of luck.
Take care.